Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We'll start our today's program. It is lecture number third of the ongoing webinar series on Islamic psychology from SIU of India. Today's topic is self-healing from Islamic perspective, and the talk will be given by Dr. Fahad Khan. Before I call upon him to talk on this topic, I'll introduce him to you all, inshallah. Dr. Fahad is a deputy and clinical director of Marital Center. Dr. Fahad Khan is a licensed clinical psychologist with a doctorate in clinical psychology and master's degree in biomedical science. He is also a Hafiz of Quran, Alhamdulillah, and has studied Islamic studies and with various scholars in the Muslim world and the US. He is currently a student at Darul Qasim, continuing his Arabic and Islamic studies under supervision of Sheikh Amin Fulwadia. He is faculty member at Concordia University, Chicago, and the College of DuPage. He has conducted numerous researches, studies, and has published book chapters and articles on traditional Islamically integrated psychotherapy (TIIP), health-seeking attitude of Muslim Americans, as well as effects of acculturation and religiosity on psychological distress. He is a fellow of International Association of Islamic Psychology and serves as an editor for the Journal of Muslim Mental Health. This is the short introduction of today's guest speaker. I will call Dr. Fahad to please talk on the given topic of Islamic healing from Islamic perspective. Dr. Fahad.
Wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala wa tu'izzu man tasha wa tudhillu man tasha bi yadika al-khayr. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Jazakallah khair for inviting me. So I originally was intending to give this talk from my office in Chicago, where it would be 11 a.m. With a much better connection and much better seating as well. But I'm still glad that I'm able to make it here. So we'll do the best of the time that we have. So I was asked to talk about the model that we have at Khalil Center. If you don't know about Khalil Center, just to give you a brief introduction about our center, we alhamdulillah have been around for about 10 years now. And during this time, we have become the largest provider of Muslim mental health in the West. So if my data is assumed correctly, that would include Canada, the UK, Australia, and other Western countries as well. And part of the work that we do involves work related to Muslim mental health. That's how we started. And part of the work is related to Islamic psychology. The Muslim mental health work is basically making sure that the services that we provide are catered to the needs of the Muslims. So the Muslims are able to find services and have access to services that otherwise they would not be able to have that access elsewhere. We started our work with that. But over time, what we realized was that we need to do more work within the realm of Islamic psychology. And so we started working in research. We started working in training and internships. And so in the last about 5 to 7 years, that's where our work has been. We recently published our first book last year. We're doing our first training on that model in Istanbul, Turkey, inshallah, in August. And so our goal is to train individuals in that. And related to the topic, when it comes to self-healing from Islamic perspective, I think it's important to understand that, because that's what was the reason, and the reason why we went into this area of Islamic psychology. Because if you look at the way the field of psychology is right now, if you ask the question like, what is psychology? Like, how do we define psychology? Most people, unfortunately, will define it. And I've done this as an experiment. I did this, in fact, here in Islamabad, Pakistan yesterday, 2 days ago at 2 different institutes. I asked them to define psychology for me. And people said, study of the mind, study of behavior, study of human behavior, study of the brain. And then somebody, said study of soul. Because because the word psychology literally means study of soul. That's where the term comes from, right? But the sad reality is that the way the psychology is being studied right now, especially in the West, which is where it's being studied the most, and the world is following the model that is being studied in the West, it doesn't cater to the soul. It doesn't look at the soul. It doesn't consider the soul. It doesn't even know what the soul is. And it has moved away from studying the soul. And so part of our work has been to talk about that. Now, in the West, the proof is always in the pudding. So if you want to ever know, like if you ever want to measure something's success or failure, you always have to look at the outcome. So if you look at the outcome of mental health work in the West right now, which is primarily based from cognitive behavioral therapy, you recognize that mental health is actually not doing so well. The suicide rate right now is extremely high. Suicide is the second leading cause of death in the United States. You have very high rate of depression and anxiety. You have extremely high rates of trauma, PTSD, and marital problems. So, if psychology and CBT and all of these things were doing so well, then my question would be, then why is it that the mental health issues are still on the rise and they aren't able to answer some of these questions? And if you look at the way CBT progressed, so if you study the history of CBT, the first wave of CBT was where you had cognitive therapy and behavioral therapy. The second wave was where they combined together and became CBT. And the third wave, which is what we're seeing now, they're coming to the East, and they took mindfulness from Buddhism. They took other concepts from Hinduism and other areas, and acceptance, for example, acceptance commitment, and that's third wave CBT. So they're trying to come to the East to take what they can and recognize that whatever they have is not working. Whatever we have in the West is not working. And this is why what we have done now is that we're trying to represent and represent Islamic psychology so that people can recognize that the heritage and the legacy that the Muslims have had has been a very glorious and luminous legacy, and something that the world of psychology can benefit and has benefited from. So, for example, if you look at OCD, Obsessive Compulsive Disorder, the credit of that has been given. In fact, if you pick up a psychology book, you can do this as an experiment. Pick up an introduction to psychology book and look at the history of psychology. You will notice that they talk about philosophers like Plato and Aristotle, and these philosophers lived 300-400 BC, right? So this is before Christ. And then they skip over. They might talk about St. Thomas Aquinas, but they skip over to the 17th, 18th century, 19th century, and start talking about psychology. So what happened in between? They don't talk about any of that in between. But what you recognize is that there's a time frame of about 2,100 years, which is skipped in between 300 BC, 400 BC, and 17, 1800s. But OCD, as an example, is a disorder which was first discovered in the 9th century by an Arab Muslim psychologist. But the credit is not given to him. The credit is given to somebody in the 17th, 18th century. Now with the publishing of new papers, that is being done, right? So these are questions that we're trying to represent and represent the field that actually existed in the in the history. So we're not trying to make something up or try to do something that is not there. The other thing that we have to recognize is inherently what's wrong with the system in the mental health in the West, right? And this is why self-help, the topic for today, is important. So in the West, what happens is that the system there is run by capitalism, right? Capitalism runs everything. Everything runs by money. This is why CBT works, right? So, or CBT is not works. This is why CBT is presented as the gold standard for every single thing. So CBT is 8 to 12 sessions. It's manualized. You can teach anyone who has a bachelor's or a master's degree how to do CBT, and they're able to implement CBT. It's cheaper for the insurance companies, right? So insurance companies save money by having practitioners conduct CBT, And so they are, there's a reason why CBT is presented as such. The system is based off of money and capitalism. Mental health or health and wellness is based off of presence or absence of illness. Okay, this is so sure. So CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy, right? This is a very reductionistic form of understanding human mind. You know, human mind is a very complex thing, as you can understand, right? When somebody is going through something, you know, there's a lot of multiple factors that can cause like stress. Just a simple word. Today, somebody asked me about stress. What causes stress? Stress can be caused by trauma. Stress can be caused by you know, events that happen to you currently. Stress can be caused by relationship problems. There could be biological factors that cause stress. But CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy basically brings everything down to something that's very reductionistic, small, simplistic model approach to human being. The other issue is that in the West, health and wellness is seen as a presence or absence of disorder. Okay, so what that means is that as Muslims, right? So if we look at ourselves, we're supposed to work on ourselves. Something called tazkiyat al-nafs, right? What is tazkiyat al-nafs? I'll try to switch to Urdu a little bit here, right? That you're supposed to keep an eye on yourself, observe yourself, make sure that you don't have any like you know, ruhani you know, problems, ruhani bimariyan, right? That's to say, like that if you have those issues, that you're supposed to identify them. So, for example, jealousy, right? Backbiting, kibr, like arrogance. These are spiritual illnesses. Okay, so we're supposed to identify them and we're supposed to keep an eye on them. In the West, that is not the case. The West, if you go to a psychologist and you say, I want you to treat me for my jealousy, the psychologist will laugh in your face and say, what are you talking about? What is jealousy? How can I treat you for jealousy? There is no disorder for jealousy. There is one that's like extreme, like, you know, if you go into like areas of relationships, there might be something there, but there's, you know, something simple like arrogance. You know, there's nothing for arrogance. And so they don't cater to spiritual illnesses, and they don't cater to anxiety until it gets to a point where someone is unable to function in their everyday life. Okay, so you know, you have anxiety, you know, as long as you can hide it, you can keep yourself busy, do whatever you want to do, that's fine. The moment you can't go to school, the moment you can't go to work, the moment you start getting angry at your wife or your kids, or start beating somebody, or get, you know, end up going to police get and you know, called on you, that's when you get to go to see a psychologist. That's when insurances will pay for you. That's a problem, right? You have to recognize that in as Muslims, and our tradition is not like that. We're supposed to identify our problems not when it's like a disorder, or not when we have these problems. We're supposed to keep an eye on ourselves at all times. That's the purpose of who like our existence. We recognize that we have evils inside of us. Like Imam Ghazali will talk about these tendencies, animalistic tendencies we have. Shah Waliullah talks about these animalistic tendencies we have. All these scholars have talked about it, and we're supposed to keep an eye on it. We know about something called the nafs that's inside of us. We're supposed to have an eye on the nafs. Some scholars have given the analogy of a horse. Some scholars have given the analogy of a donkey, right? Like your nafs is like a donkey. Like if you don't train it, then then the donkey will do whatever it wants to do. But if you train it, you can ride it, you can use it to your benefit. And so we have to recognize these things, and that's our health and wellness is beyond you know, just the presence and absence of mental disorder. And I want to tell you something which is interesting, maybe you know already, is that now since the late 90s and early 2000s, the Western psychological model is moving towards this approach of identifying you know, a spectrum. So there's a model by Riff and Keyes and others. It's called the mental health continuum model or something, and they're beginning to recognize that that mental health and wellness is on a spectrum. It's not presence or absence of illnesses. But this is something Muslims have always talked about. So part of self-help and part of keeping ourselves healthy is making sure that not only are we free of psychological disorders, but how we get to those psychological disorders, we have to make sure we're also mindful of those problems, those issues, that these spiritual illnesses, these spiritual problems that we have inside of us, we cater to them as well. Okay, we're also looking at it from a preventative method. The other difference that I would say between our model and what's happening in the West that's beneficial to our model, there's a lot of different things here, is that as Islamic psychologists, we don't just rely on empirical and rational sources. We rely on empirical, rational, as well as scriptural sources, as well as wahi. We say that all three of them are equally important and equally valid. Okay, so when it comes to science and human psychology, we take all of them as equal, and where our rationality and our empiricism stops, that's where we look at Quran and Sunnah, and we see where we can find some guidance. That's what Ibn Sina did. That's what all of the predecessors did, right? They used that for their guidance. So, for example, if you look at our soul, we might be able to empirically measure our thoughts. We might be able to empirically measure or find some rational support for our emotions. But when it comes to ruh, we might not be able to. We might be able to find some evidence, but the other evidence, we might have to go back to the scripture. We might have to go back to Quran and Sunnah and see what exists over there. So that's a benefit that we have as Islamic psychologists. We also look at human beings as inherently good. And then everyone can connect with the divine, which is something we call fitra, right? Now, you might think that, well, humanistic psychology has that too. Humanistic psychology looks at human beings as positive. But the problem is that humanistic psychology was a reaction to Freudian psychology, because Freudian psychology saw human beings as inherently evil, having negative drives, negative tendencies. And so as a reaction to that, humanistic psychology was formed. For us, we're not having a reaction. This idea of fitra comes from the Quran. It's part of our aqidah. So every Muslim has to believe in the idea of fitra, right? There's a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? That every child is born upon his primordial essence, which is the fitra. And that also allows us to see other people as good. Like I was talking to someone today about this, that one of the tendencies we have, unfortunately, at least here in Pakistan, maybe also in India and Kashmir, is that that when we look at somebody, our default assumption is that this person is bad, and they have to prove themselves to be good before we consider them to be good. That's not the Islamic way of thinking, right? I don't know where that comes from. Is that a post-colonial thing, or I don't know where the stems are from? Perhaps that's a research study that somebody needs to do. But our Muslim and Islamic aqidah is that we have to look at everyone and recognize that there's a nur of Allah that exists inside of us, inside of everyone, and everyone is positive. Everyone is a good human being, and yes, everyone has evil inside of them as well. But until that evil comes out, we have to assume the default is always positive, right? So that's another benefit that we have of Islamic psychology. Then other benefits from a psychological perspective, like as a psychologist, when we look at like the Sufi model, there's a push towards, like, if you have a teacher and you have a student, both teacher and student are working on themselves. In the Western psychology, if you have a psychologist and you have a client or a patient, psychologist can tell the patient to work on themselves, but psychologist doesn't have to work on himself. There's not much emphasis on, like, you should also work on your own self. In our model, we try to emphasize that everybody needs to work on themselves. I have problems I need to work on. I may not have psychological problems, but I probably have spiritual problems. I have my own struggles that I need to work on, and I should work on them. Just because I'm a high functioning clinical psychologist does not mean that I don't need help. Right? Because if I go into that mindset, then automatically I'm going to go and think less of other people. I'm going to assume that everybody else is worse than me, and that's not the assumption that we should have. Now, I want to kind of, using some of these ideas, I want to kind of move towards self-help. So the idea of self-help. So that's the topic that I was asked to speak on. So I want to go more specifically into that, self-healing. I think the question of healing, obviously, when you're asked a question, you have to first define what is healing, right? Healing would automatically assume that there has been some kind of a wound or some kind of a trauma or some kind of a problem or a disease, right? That has happened. So if we look at this spectrum approach, right? Let's look at the spectrum approach. So on one hand, we have someone who is completely spiritually and psychologically healthy. Okay. On the other hand, you have someone who is spiritually as well as psychologically ill. Okay, so this person has, and I've seen people like this. So, for example, let's say a child grew up in a traumatic household. A lot of the people who grew up in Kashmir, I mean, there's a lot of trauma there, psychological trauma that's happening. So, as a result of that trauma, what ends up happening is that their spirituality is affected. They're not able to connect with Allah. Some people, as a result of trauma, can sometimes have a negative effects of trauma. Sometimes there's positive, sometimes there's negative effects. Negative effects of trauma can be that they're moving away from religion. They might become atheists. Sometimes they have like other evil tendencies inside of them. So all of these things are on then this end. So there's like PTSD. There might be some personality disorder, like borderline personality disorder. There might be some spiritual illnesses as well. So you have to first identify for yourself where you are in this spectrum, right? It would be, I think, impossible for someone to be completely spiritually and psychologically healthy. I don't think anyone out there that I know of is completely spiritual and psychologically healthy. I don't think anyone can be, because we're human beings at the end of the day, right? I will give you example of Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam. In the Quran, one of the human tendencies that we have, like Imam Ghazali says, that we have these sifat of Baha'im, right? The animals who graze, and among those sifat are the sifat of eating, drinking, sleeping, and sexual needs, right? So sexual need is a human tendency that we all have. Now, if used properly, like if you're spending that time with your spouse, we know from a hadith that you get rewarded for that time. But if not used properly, then that's a big sin, a sin that is punishable by death as well. So we know in Surah Yusuf that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the interaction between Yusuf alayhi salam and the wife of the king, he says, وَلَقَدْ هَمَّتْ بِهِ وَهَمَّ بِهَا لَوْلَا أَن رَأَى بُرْهَانَ رَبِّهِ, that she approached him and he would have approached her had he not seen the sign from his Lord, right? So what we understand from that verse is that the Yusuf alayhi salam, even though he was a prophet of Allah, who are the best people to walk on this world, would have chosen to go with his human tendency if he had not been guided by Allah, right? So there's no human being in this world other than prophets, because prophets are divinely protected, but currently there are no prophets. So there's no one in this world who can say they are spiritually and psychologically healthy, right? So on this spectrum, all of us here and everyone out there is going to be somewhere in between, having spiritual illnesses and having spiritual and psychological illnesses, right? So identify where you are. So let's work kind of backwards now from psychological illnesses. So psychological illnesses, you have to identify which psychological illnesses that you might be suffering from. Now, obviously, some of the worst ones that I have seen, like trauma, is very common, especially like among Kashmiris and among our culture. And sometimes people don't even know what trauma is. Oftentimes when I ask people, like, have you suffered any trauma? People will say, no, I have not. And then when I define trauma for them, when I tell them that, trauma can be, for example, for a young child, for a 5-6-year-old child, observing their parents argue out loud, right? Let's say the two parents are having an argument about something random. It's not something like they're not fighting with each other. They're just arguing out loud. If a child that's 5-year-old observes them, or a 4-year-old observes them, just watching them is traumatic for the child, can be traumatic for the child. In fact, there was a study that was done where they compared the brains of those who went to war and little children who observed their parents argue out loud, and they saw that the damage was very similar. So that can be traumatic. Then there's obviously emotional abuse, physical abuse, there's sexual abuse, there's bullying, there's being in a car accident, having someone die, being in a natural disaster like earthquakes or something like that. financial loss. All these are traumas. And if you mix all of them together, then you have complex trauma. So trauma, and then trauma can manifest in so many different ways. So you can have PTSD, which, by the way, you can also have post-traumatic growth. So not all trauma results in PTSD. I mean, generally speaking, trauma is experiencing something bad. Somebody asked, is trauma experiencing something bad? Generally speaking, it's something that you experience that's outside of normal, right? So you're living your normal life, everyday life, and something happens that is completely outside of the norm, and something that's unexpected, that basically takes away from your normal experience, and your body has a response to it. And that's traumatic, right? So let's say you're driving and all of a sudden, like, you hit something, that's traumatic because you all of a sudden something happened that was unexpected. So that's one manifestation is PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. Another manifestation could be what's called borderline personality disorder. So which is very common with females, right? Where females who have gone through trauma, they're not unable to form relationships with other people. They have these kind of tendencies and mood swings, and sometimes suicidal tendencies as well. There's also dissociative identities that can happen. So when a young child experiences trauma, because their mind is not able to understand what's happening, their mind splits, and that splitting causes an alternative personality to form inside of their brain, inside of their mind. And then if it happens again, their mind will split again. And sometimes you have different personalities. It's not as severe as what you might see in the movies. Like there was a movie that was called Split. But that's a Hollywood version of dissociative identity disorder. I'm talking about something that's less severe. But these are some manifestations of trauma. Now, some of these are, all of these are treatable, but some of these are have to be managed. Some of them, but all of them require some professional help, right? So if you experience these symptoms, that some of them we talked about right now, you should definitely seek professional help, because at that point, not having professional help is going to be very dangerous for you. It's almost like if you had a wound, right, and that wound was infected, right? If you got a cut on your arm or on your stomach and you put a Band-Aid on it, it might heal itself after a while. But let's say that it started getting, white and red or green or something, and now there's pus coming from it. It's infected. Now you have to go see a doctor. You cannot heal it by yourself. It's impossible. That's how trauma is. So if you're seeing these symptoms and you're unable to carry out certain actions, and you're triggered easily, and you're having emotional problems, and some of them, like I said, you can search online for some of these words that I've used, then definitely seek professional help. And then there's depression and anxiety. But depression and anxiety is very common. And I think this is something that we have to recognize too, that having depression and anxiety in this world, within the context of spirituality in Islam, is actually normal. So anxiety, for example, in this world is meant to be anxiety provoking. This meant, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Dunya sijnul mu'min wa jannatul kafir," right? That this world is like a prison for the believer and heaven for the disbeliever. So obviously, if you're in a prison, you're not going to be comfortable. You're going to have anxiety. You're going to have difficulty in the prison. So we're meant to have anxiety here. That's part of the what the world demands from us. Many Sufi scholars believe that depression is part of this world because we're separated from the divine. And if we remain separated from Allah, as long as we're separated from Allah, we'll continue to have depression. So depression and anxiety is normal. Some of that is normal, but you have to recognize for yourself how much of that can you handle? How much of that can you take? How much of that is something that you're ready to carry on and you can manage? There comes a point in all of these disorders where there's a threshold. Beyond that threshold, it is very difficult for the person to handle, right? So if you can manage it, if you use your spirituality, if you use prayer and zikr and reading Quran and connecting with other human beings and doing volunteer work and all of these spiritual ways of connecting with the nature and with Allah and other people, then that's fine. But if you can't, then you have to seek professional help. And sometimes depression and anxiety can be so severe that you might even need to use medications. Some of the anxiety disorders, like we talk about trauma is kind of anxiety-based disorders. We also have obsessive compulsive disorder. We have all these other disorders that are anxiety based. Depression. We also have mood disorders. Some of them are biological disorders, right? So I'm kind of going through them pretty fast because I want you to recognize some of them. There's like schizophrenia, there's bipolar disorder. These are biological disorders that you have to understand. Then we also have some common problems, right? So we're kind of stepping down from like psychological illnesses into some common, you can say like psychological symptoms. One of the most common symptoms that people talk about is procrastination, right? So not being able to do your work on time, delaying your problems until the last minute, not being able to focus, right? Now, people sometimes think that procrastination or even focusing, people will say that it is because of ADHD. Oftentimes ADHD is misdiagnosed and overly diagnosed in the West, especially in the 90s and 2000s. And now we've seen that there's an overdiagnosis of ADHD. So we have to recognize that some of these symptoms are because of something else, because of anxiety, because of depression. One of the most common underlying cause of procrastination is actually mood issues, is actually depression. So instead of trying to look into motivation or procrastination, look at depression, see what's causing your depression. You might be suffering from that. Instead of looking at attention and trying to solve it through ADHD or medications, I don't know if you know this, but there's more recent studies have shown how screen time can cause symptoms of ADHD. Just looking at screens for a couple of hours can cause problems related to attention, can cause problems related to being impulsive, can cause little children to become hyperactive and emotional. So if children are constantly looking at their screens and computers and their tablets, then they're going to have symptoms of ADHD and they're going to be misdiagnosed, right? Now, within that realm of like psychiatric or the symptoms, common psychological problems, I also want to tell you that there are common psychological solutions that you can also apply. One of the biggest and the most beneficial thing that you can do for yourself, that we all can do for ourselves, is sleep. I think that most people that come to me for their illnesses and their problems, when I work with them, I advise them to work on their sleep. There's a reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created وَجَعَلْنَا نَوْمَكُمْ سُبَاتًا وَجَعَلْنَا اللَّيْلَ لِبَاسًا. Like there's a reason why that there's nights were created for sleep. And we're meant to sleep. If you look at how the world was 1,000 years ago, when the sun would set, our brain, there will be less light going through our eyelids, and our brain would secrete melatonin. Melatonin would cause to relax, and by Isha time we would be sleepy and we would go to sleep. And when the sun would rise, the light would come through our eyelids and brain would stop secreting melatonin and we would wake up naturally. That was a natural cycle. What is happening now is that most people are awake, and there's natural light, right? There's LED lights. These are bright blue lights, white lights that are extremely bad for our eyes. And most people are awake because our brain doesn't know that's day or night. The only way the brain is going to know it's day or night is through the light. So if we're looking at screens until late night, if we have bright lights in our houses, the brain won't know. And so most people can't sleep until it's very late at night, and then they try to go to bed. And when they can't fall asleep, if they're in their bed, what do? We go back on our phones, right? That's the worst thing that we can do. That's the opposite of what we should be doing. So having good, healthy sleeping hygiene, sleeping habit. If you take a very healthy individual, someone who doesn't have any psychological problems, and you take away their sleep, not only will they have psychological problems, there's actually studies that were done on this. People who work night shifts, they had like bipolar disorder symptoms. They even had physical problems. They had like blood pressure problems. So that's a very easy fix, easy preventative fix that we all can have. The second thing is our diet, right? So there are dietary things that affect our psychological health. There's some study that talks about the bacteria in our gut and its effect on our mood. So eating healthy is also important. Eating a balanced diet is important. There are some foods that are really good for our health. So like one of the recent ones that I tried myself is called talbina, which was the diet of our Prophet ﷺ, which is made from barley. And there's a study that was done recently that talked about how talbina reduces symptoms of depression and anxiety, right? If you eat more carbohydrates will cause more anxiety. Eating more meat is also unhealthy. So all these are easy fixes. The other one would be connecting with the nature. So we are always surrounded by machines. We're always surrounded by technology. It's good to take some time off from that. Good to connect with your family. Good to connect with the nature. Taking a walk outside, while you're doing that walk, reflecting on the creation of Allah, doing some dhikr, like really contemplating on Allah's creation. If you are doing it at night, look at the stars. If you're doing it during the day, look at the leaves, whatever you see around yourself. If you see people, really trying to observe people, how they are. These are healthy ways to prevent a lot of these psychological illnesses. Okay. Now, moving down from that, we're going to go into now spiritual illnesses, right? So we know from a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that a believer is like a mirror to his brother, right? So what does that mean? Now, if I asked you like a question, I said, how would you know if you had any problems, right? How would you know if you suffer from any issues? Like for a narcissistic individual, does a narcissistic individual know that he is narcissistic? Most narcissistics don't even know. They don't admit they're narcissistic, right? They're not even aware of the fact that they're narcissistic. So Imam Ghazali talks about in his Ihya al-Ulum, he says that he quotes a hadith of the Prophet. He says, إِذَا أَرَادَ اللَّهُ بِعَبْدِهِ خَيْرًا بَصَّرَهُ بِعُيُوبِ نَفْسِهِ. That when Allah wishes something good for his servant, he gives him insight into his own deficiencies, his own faults, his own shortcomings, right? So then Imam Ghazali will say that in order to gain that insight, in order to gain that awareness, a person can't do it themselves, right? I will not be able to. It's going to take a lot of work for me to just know by myself. He actually quotes I think Umar radiallahu anhu, who said that may Allah bless the one who gives me insight into my deficiencies, or something like that. There was a quote by Umar, but the idea is that someone has to do it for you. So Imam Ghazali says that you can either go to a sheikh, a teacher who can guide you, who can help you and identify for you your problems. You can either have a really good friend. Now, we have a really skewed idea of what a friendship is like. So part of the self-healing is going to require you to know who is your part of your suhbah, who's part of your gathering, your company, right? If you have friends that just say yes to everything you do, that's not real friendship, right? If you tell your friends, oh, I want to go and smoke marijuana, or I want to go and do this, and they're just like, oh yeah, go do whatever you want. They don't challenge you, they don't push you. If you're using bad words, and they don't stop you from using bad words. If you miss your prayer, they don't say to you, hey man, you missed prayer, why are you not praying? Someone who challenges you, someone who pushes you, someone who identifies for you your own deficiencies, that is a real friend. Well, the idea that we have nowadays, someone who just says yes to you and supports you whether you do good or bad things, that is not a real friend. So Imam Ghazali says that a friend, rafiqan salihan, that those are the words that he uses, a righteous companion can also help you identify your own deficiencies. Imam Ghazali also says an enemy can help identify your own deficiencies, because an enemy will always be very blunt with you, will always tell you straight in your face what your problems are, where your friend might be a little bit hesitant. So identifying for ourselves what our weaknesses, what our spiritual illnesses are, is very important. Some of that requires some guidance from other people. Some of the work can be done by our own selves. One of the methods that I also recommend is journaling. So taking some time off from your day, and being able to sit down and write about what you did. So Imam Ghazali actually talks about muhasaba, right? So accountability. Just even if before you go to bed, this is actually really good for people who have anxiety. This is a very good self-help, self-healing method. One of the common problems that people face is that when they're about to go to sleep, all of a sudden their minds are bombarded with thoughts. They have these racing thoughts about their life. What am I doing tomorrow? What am I supposed to do tomorrow? What did you do today? Where's my life going? My degree, my job, getting married, my kids, all of these thoughts come straight into your mind. The reason for that is because all day long, we go through different things that trigger these thoughts in our mind. But because we're busy all day long, that we don't have to worry about these thoughts, so we push them to the side, right? We kind of just, we just keep carry on with our daily activities. But when we're about to go to sleep, our guards go down, and we're no longer able to hold these things to the side. So what ends up happening is that these thoughts then come and attack us. So one of the method is that before you go to sleep, ideally on a piece of paper, on a journal, but you can actually do this in your mind as well, or it's better to have it on a piece of paper. Just go through your day. Okay, what time did I wake up? Did I pray my fajr? Did I wake up late? Did I have a productive day? Was I good to people? Was I rude to someone? If there was somebody that you were rude to, call them, message them, say, I'm sorry I was rude to you today. Don't keep it in your mind, because it's going to cause more anxiety, more sadness to you. And it's going to be more at a subconscious level. You won't be able to recognize it. If somebody caused you harm, right, before going to bed, forgive them. For the sake of Allah, I forgive this person. He was mean to me today, or she said this to me, but you know what? I will let it go. If there was a task that you forgot, I was supposed to do this, I forgot to do this today. Don't keep it in your mind. Write it down. Our mind is not meant to be like this memory machine, right? On the computer, you have this RAM that's supposed to keep whatever is being run on, on there. No, like our mind is like a vessel which is supposed to be in constant remembrance of Allah. So if you have things to remember, write them down. We all have phones in our pocket that we can, refer to later. If not, then keep a small notebook with yourself, but write things down. And so, you can do that. Another important journaling technique is in the US that uses gratitude journaling. So there's a person who came up with a 5-minute journal. And before you go to sleep, identify 3 to 5 things that you're grateful for. And a lot of people have found that to be beneficial. So that's one way to also help yourself spiritually. And then, on the more, now we're coming towards the end of this spectrum now, is to be more connected with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to be more connected, spiritually. So, you can do that by doing constant dhikr, because, through dhikr, ala bi dhikrillah tatma'innul qulub, through dhikr, indeed hearts find contentment. Reading Quran with translation, praying on time, using prayer as a way of disconnecting from this world and connecting with Allah. Having a more meaningful connection with people rather than a superficial connection. Having a more love for the Prophet ﷺ, more respect for like your teachers and your parents, like a more of a divinely instilled, divinely centered relationships with other human beings. So that would be on this end of the spectrum. So I think I've spoken enough. I want to now leave some time for Q&A. I think I was asked to do that. So if are there any questions or comments, so I'll end my conversation here, inshallah. Jazakallah khair.
Okay, inshallah. अगर किसी के पास कोई सवाल है तो प्लीज हैंड रेस करें, इंशाल्लाह उनको अनम्यूट किया जाएगा, या फिर चैट में लिखें.
Hello, assalamu alaikum, sir.
Walaikum salam.
Sir, can you explain me living in introvert is a sign of depression?
Okay, so introvertedness. So introvertedness can be a personality factor, right? So some people are born introverts. In fact, I believe there are studies that show that genetically you can be introverted. But if you're born into a family where the parents are introverted, then you're also likely to be introverted. So part of the introvertedness can be a factor of personality. Now, as Muslims, we're supposed to be balanced, right? So a Muslim is not someone who's going to be out and about all the time, right? And we're not somebody who's supposed to be just like ascetic monks, who just kind of disconnect from everybody, and they just kind of go into their cave and they don't talk to anybody. We don't live that life. If we look at the example that we have, Uswa Hasana of the Prophet ﷺ, we have a balanced life. He spent time alone, in a cave, right? He spent time with the Sahaba. He spent time, in battlefield. So we're supposed to live a life that is more balanced. So what I would suggest is that, like, I'm an introvert personally. That's where I am. I measured myself. I fall more on if you look at the spectrum from 0 to 100, I think my score was like 37, right? So 50 would be in the middle. I was more introverted. What you have to do, what I do is I push myself to do a little bit of more extrovertedness activities. So if there's a family gathering, even though I don't want to, I have to kind of push myself. Because what happens is that, and if you take a healthy individual and you lock them up in a quiet room, when you're alone, there's that you have a shaitan with you, and the shaitan's going to put negative thoughts in your mind. People who are alone with their thoughts and they're alone all the time and just be by themselves, what happens is that they become negative and depressed and suicidal. Sometimes a very healthy individuals can become suicidal. In fact, anxiety becomes high when people become introverted or isolated. In COVID, there was high anxiety, not just because of illnesses, but also because people were isolated and withdrawn. Isolation and being withdrawn is a sign of depression as well, right? So depression can cause people to become isolated and withdrawn. So what I suggest is that you identify for yourself, and this is where self-awareness can help. Identify for yourself, am I too introverted or not? Is this too much for me? If you are, you have to push yourself to go out and connect with people, connect with the right people, your family members, your community, those friends that are righteous friends, going to prayer in the masjid, things like that are healthy for you. There's a study that was done in the Harvard that was on happiness, and they found out that people that were the most happiest were the ones that were more socially connected. So I hope that answered your question. Somebody typed in chat about writing down my thoughts every night. I try to write down, but I delay it for the next night, and every day is the same story. Okay, so I think one of the reasons that's kind of like procrastination. One of the problems with that task is that you make it a big demanding task. If you there's few ways of journaling. One is a structured journaling. You can just take something that has like questions and you can just answer it, right? You can take a simple thought record online and try to do it yourself. The other thing is, don't make it a big deal, right? Don't make it like, oh, I'm gonna sit and write down. Like I gave you an ideal situation, like do your whole day. You don't have to. Okay, I'm only going to spend 1 minute writing down my thoughts, right? 1 minute. I mean, you can spare 1 minute. 1 minute is nothing. I'm only going to write down 3 lines of my thoughts, right? If you tell your brain that, you can trick your brain into doing a task. But if you tell your brain, oh, I have to sit down and write down my thoughts for the day, your brain will say, oh, especially if your thoughts are negative, right? Because negative thoughts are depressing thoughts. So the brain will say, you know what? No, do this tomorrow, because right now, you're too busy and this is too painful for you. So don't do that. Just keep it short, keep it simple. Once you do it over and over again, it'll get easier and easier. It becomes a habit. When it becomes a habit, then you'll see that you'll be able to spend more and more time. How can we remain without judging others while in the conversation? So I kind of talked a little bit about that before, right? First thing is that recognizing that everybody has a fitrah, everybody is born on a fitrah, and everybody has the nur, the light of Allah, the ruh of that comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So everybody has that. The other thing is that identify for yourself, are you being triggered by certain people? Like for example, let's say that you were traumatized as a young individual by some type of people, some people that looked a certain way. Now, every time you're around those type of people, you're going to probably misjudge them. You probably don't want to be around them. You're going to judge them a lot. That's a problem that you have. That's not a problem with them. So you need to work on your own traumas and your own insecurities. But that would be a way that you can work on. Somebody has their hand raised. You want to unmute them, Huzaima?
Assalamu alaikum.
Yeah. Walaikum salam.
My question is, what is mood disorders? And people usually suffering from this mood disorders. I usually just feel with my friends, they are suffering from this problem. So what is the solution of this mood disorders?
Okay. Good question. Mood disorders is a wide range of disorders. So you have disorders, for example. Can you mute someone? I think someone's noise. Oh, there we go. Thank you. So mood disorders is a wide range of disorders. You have disorders like depression falls under mood disorder. Anxiety also falls under mood disorder. But you have disorders like bipolar disorder, where somebody's mood can go from being very, very happy to very, very depressed. And generally, the word mood disorder is used for depression. Then the question is, well, how do you help someone with depression? First thing is you have to identify what causes depression. Sometimes depression can be caused by something as simple as vitamin D deficiency, right? In females, sometimes depression is caused by something biological, like hormonal changes, like postpartum depression, for example. So identifying the source and cause of depression can help. Some people who isolate, like we just said, or withdraw themselves from others can also be depressed. So if we're talking about depression, then knowing the cause can help. If it's bipolar disorder, the bipolar disorder is actually biologically based. And medication is actually the first line of defense for bipolar disorder. And with bipolar disorder, actually sleep is the most important factor. And sleep should never be missed with somebody who has bipolar disorder because it will trigger a bipolar episode. Let's see, somebody here asked a question. There's a lot of questions in the chat, so I'm trying to go through them. How to reduce negative thoughts in people with anxiety. Okay, so now if you, I'm gonna give you like the short and easy answer, but there's also a long and hard answer. The long and hard answer is that, again, know the root cause of anxiety. Maybe it's related to trauma, maybe it's related to OCD, maybe, and then you have to go to a psychologist and sit with them and work on it. The short and easy answer is identify what is causing the negative thoughts, right? So I'll give you an example. Let's say that you are somebody who's working in a job and you get a call from your boss next door and he says, come here, I need to talk to you, right? And all of a sudden you have like negative thoughts. You're like, oh my God, I'm going to get fired. And you know, what did I do? Did I miss an email? I'm a bad worker. I did something wrong. Now, the boss didn't say that you're getting fired or you missed something. All the boss said is, come here, I want to talk to you. Maybe the boss wants to give you a raise. Maybe the boss wants to give you a promotion. Maybe he wants to commend you for the good worker that you are. The fact that you have negative thoughts has to do with your own what we call schemas, right? These things the beliefs that have been built inside of us as we grew up as young kids. Sometimes we're told as young children that you're a failure, you know, you're never going to be any good, and so we grow up with these kind of beliefs that we have. So identify the thoughts related to the situation and then learn to challenge the thoughts, right? So find evidence that supports it. So if you're in this situation, you know, if you're like having a negative thought, oh my God, I'm a bad worker, find evidence that, well, what makes me, you know, what's the evidence that I'm a bad worker? You know, I've submitted everything on time. I might have maybe missed one deadline, but everybody misses one deadline. You know, find evidence that goes against the thought. So kind of do this like, imagine you're like the judge and you have one hand, you know, this the lawyer that is supporting the thought, the lawyer that is negating the thought, right? Oftentimes what you'll find is that people who have negative thoughts, you have more evidence against the negative thought, right? And if you go through that process, you're able to find a more balanced thought. The idea is not to switch from negative to positive, right? That's almost impossible. The idea is to switch from negative to a more balanced thought. So I hope that was helpful. Siddiq, go ahead. Walaikum salam.
Sir, I just have a doubt. Like, whenever I'm trying to do something new, I'm able to do it for like, let's say 3 days or like 1 week or like 10 days or 15 days. And after a particular point of time, it's like totally gone. Even it is not like increasing and decreasing. It will be going on as a like sort of an habit, and after some time it just stops. And after like it goes on, and like 3-4 months later, and again I'll be thinking of it and I'll be doing it again. So that time it will be more difficult for me to do again, but I'll be doing it, and then the same thing go on, and after some time again that will be gone. Like for example, for preparation for my higher studies, or like even day-to-day life, like prayer or these kind of things, I don't know how to commit. But the thing is, I know what it is. Okay, like we know the ilm is there, but the deed is not there. But I cannot able to come over it. I know it is wrong, but I don't know how it's gone. Sometimes it is there, sometimes it is not at all there.
Okay. So I think you have to understand that there's the idea that first of all, it's natural, it's normal, right? Our iman is not supposed to be like a stagnant thing. Presence and absence of iman is one thing, but we all have iman. Most people have iman inside of our hearts. Sometimes it's high, sometimes it's low. Sometimes you want to get up and pray more. You want to pray sunnah and nafil, and you want to go to the masjid and pray. Sometimes you don't even want to get up from your bed and pray in your own room. right? That's completely normal. The Sahaba used to complain about that as well. So that's one thing that you have to recognize, that it's completely normal to have that those ups and downs. The other thing I want you to identify is that that when you do have this push to do something, don't overexert yourself. I think a lot of times people go overboard. There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where he said, "Ahabbul a'mali ila Allahi adwamuha wa in qalla," that the most favored actions in the eyes of Allah are the ones that are the most consistent, even if they're small, right? So, like sometimes people in Ramadan, they will donate a lot of money, thousands and thousands of dollars, but outside of Ramadan, they don't donate any money. That's not a healthy habit. Healthy habit would be like if I want to donate, $1,200 in Ramadan, instead I should donate $100 every month, right? Because the deed is less, but it's more consistent, right? So focus on consistency. Don't focus on the quantity. Focus on quality. So try to do the bare minimum that you can, right? And above that, raise yourself a little bit. Even if you feel like doing a lot more, go a little bit. Just like a Sahabi came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, I can read the Quran in 7 days, or he said 3 days, I think, first. And the Prophet ﷺ said, no, don't do it in 3 days. Then he said, I can do it more. So the Prophet keep telling him, don't do it. Why? Because even if you feel like you can do that, don't do that. That would be an injustice to yourself, and you won't be able to keep it up, right? So recognize that a lot of these habits are developed through lifestyles. Most people like who diet, they can't maintain their diet because they go really hard 1 week and then they can't maintain it. So the best are the ones who go slowly and they're able to then maintain it. Amin, do you have a question?
Sir, I have two questions. First one is how I trained my memory and to remove the negative elements and enhance my memory power. And second question is how to maintain consistency in study.
Okay, so the first thing about memory, and I think the second thing is also kind of related. Try to clear your mind and your life from distractions. Okay, our mind and our life is filled with distractions. One of the biggest distractions that you experience in your life is through your cell phone. Okay, because this, I mean, just like notifications itself, turn off as many notifications as you can. You don't have to go and read the news every day. You don't have to go on social media and look at what people have posted. You don't have to like follow somebody and make sure you are caught up with their, Instagram or whatever post that they have. That's stuff that you can free your mind from, okay? Politics, for example. I mean, unless you're really politically committed, unless you feel like that's something that you can go through and make a change in, if it's not your priority, don't worry about it. Don't worry about the news. Sometimes people, media and social media is meant to attract you. They have algorithms that is meant, it's kind of like a dopamine fix, that they're like, they know where the people are like addicts. So to give you a fix so that people keep coming back. We have to recognize that we don't need to keep going back to them. So learn to turn off distractions as much as you can. Cut down television if you can, cut down watching. If a new movie comes out, you don't have to watch it, right? I can tell you personally speaking that in the beginning it's hard because you're used to it, but after like maybe like first few months, it becomes very, very easy. You don't even miss it after a while, right? You enjoy your lifestyle because your lifestyle is free from distractions. Also learn to say no. If somebody asks you for something, like, hey, can you help me out with this stuff? Can you help with that? As much as nice as you might be, say, I'm sorry, I can't. You don't always have to say yes. Many organizations will ask me for help, and I say, sorry, I can't, because I don't want to overcommit myself. Don't overcommit yourself for doing something that you can't do. And then the other thing is like I said before, have a healthy and hygiene when it comes to your sleep. Maintain that sleeping habit. That's going to help you with your memory. A lot of students, what they do is they stay up late and they study and they sleep less. If you look at the study of sleep and memory, they've shown that sleep helps consolidate memory from short-term to long-term memory. So especially during the exam times, if you stay up late at night and you study and you only get 3 or 4 hours of sleep, most of what you study you will forget by the morning time when you go to take the exam. So make sure that you're maintaining your sleep pattern. Let's see. Expecting worst case scenario is a technique for anxiety and CBT, but as Muslim, it's good. I don't know what the question is, sorry, if that's a question or not. Oh, is expecting the worst case scenario is good as a Muslim? No, it's not good as a Muslim, right? In fact, we should always have husn al-dhan. But sometimes people have too much of husn al-dhan. So as Muslims, we live a balanced life. They say al-imanu bayn al-khawfi wal-raja, right? Faith is between fear and hope. So, you know, some people are always expecting good outcome, like someone who doesn't study and says, you know, I'll pass, inshallah, I'll pass, no problem. They don't study at all. Obviously, you need to instill some fear. Say, wait, hold on a second. No, you won't pass. You have to do some studying. But then there's some people who study all the time, you know, hundreds of hours, and they still have that fear, that anxiety that I will fail. They always expect the worst case scenario. Then that's not healthy. So we have to be balanced, and we have to look at ourselves where we are and then counter that with the opposite. How, as a Muslim, can we react to abusive parent-child relations, especially because we're supposed to have a husn akhlaq towards our parents? Okay, it's a good question. So, you know, I read a quote a while back. It said, if you were going to blame your parents for all the bad things that they did, then give them credit for all the good things they did as well. Our parents made mistakes. And if you're not a parent, I'm a parent of 2 children, I can tell you, you will make mistakes. We will make mistakes too. No one is a perfect parent, okay? And so recognize that parents made their mistakes. Some of the mistakes were very severe mistakes, and some of them were not so severe mistakes. Parents will continue to make mistakes. Parents, even now as an adult, will sometimes come to you and say, oh, I'm only saying this because of my love, but they're actually trying to like put pressure on you, or, you know, they're trying to live their life vicariously through you. Our job as children is to be kind to them. You know, وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. Be nice to them, be kind, don't disrespect, don't, you know, talk back. Address their concerns, address their fears. Our relationship with our parents, our relationship with anyone in this world is through Allah. We are supposed to please Allah, not our parents, not our wives, not our children, and not our friends, and not our brothers. That's what we're supposed to do. So maintain your relationship within the context of Allah. And that's why Allah says in the Quran, right? So if they do something, don't say oof to them and make dua for them, that, oh Allah, forgive them. You know, رَبِّ ارْحَمْهُمَا كَمَا رَبَّيَانِي صَغِيرًا, right? Why have mercy on them? Because they made mistakes, right? And they had mercy on me when I was young, so have mercy on them. So recognize that they made mistakes, but now as an adult, it's our job to work on ourselves, right? We can no longer blame them. Even if we did blame them, let's say that it was 80% their fault that we have problems. Well, so what? What can we do now? What can they do now? If they sat in front of you and said sorry to you, apologized to you, that still wouldn't undo the damage, right? The damage is done. You still need to work on yourself. So, you know, still be kind to them, forgive them, and do as much work as you can upon yourself. How to stay balanced between superior and inferior feelings? That's a tough one. For your own self, it's a tough one. I would say try to have somebody who can help you with that. Just like I said earlier about Imam Ghazali, that having someone who can be a mirror for you, having someone who can help identify how you are, a close confidant, a psychologist or a counselor would be another example. You know, if you have a good sheikh, I don't know if you have access to a good sheikh or a teacher, that would be another one, but find someone who can help you identify that. How to overcome the trauma caused due to COVID crisis, especially the trauma inflicted during the recent. So, you know, any trauma or anxiety, any anxiety or fear-based issues, the treatment is very, very simple. It's hard to do, but it's simple in principle, which is that you face that which gives you anxiety, right? So in COVID, right now, for example, like at least in Pakistan, the numbers are kind of low. In India, I think the situation is still pretty bad, but people are still afraid to like go outside of their house. They're still afraid to go and talk to people, even though people are vaccinated, numbers are low. You have to step out of your comfort zone, right? At some point, you have to leave your house at some point. So face the fear, face that which is causing you anxiety. That is the treatment for trauma. That is a treatment for OCD. That's the treatment for any anxiety-based disorders. That's the treatment for those who have panic attacks, right? That you make them face that which is causing them the anxiety and the panic. So whatever it is that caused you anxiety, that caused you trauma during COVID, whatever that you're afraid to do, right? Go visit people or, you know, leave the house, do that, right? Now, you don't need to go above and beyond and go to a hospital without a mask or something, you know, don't expose yourself like that. but I mean something that's healthy, something that's manageable, right? If you go to a very crowded place, obviously wear a mask. If you go to a masjid or something, but don't still be locked inside of your house and avoid seeing other people. Why? Because of COVID. If somebody is vaccinated, I would recommend go and see them. If someone is depressed and having suicidal thoughts, how can you calm her and deal with it? If it's somebody else, the problem with suicidal thoughts is that oftentimes it might be a little bit too late for you to do any intervention, so you might have to refer them because they might end up taking their life. So I would say, take them to the hospital, let the doctors deal with them. They might need to be medicated. As far as depression or sadness is concerned in general, the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ was that you listen to them. If you do the most basic therapeutic technique, which is just to sit and listen to the individual that is suffering, that in itself is very, very healthy and healing. Just sometimes you don't even have to say anything. People sometimes think that you have to say something to help them. No, just sit and listen, just sit next to them, offer that shoulder that they're looking for, and that in itself will do a lot of healing. How do we help a child to participate in creative activities because children this time are not inclined? What will they say? Okay, yeah, so obviously children need more, this day and age, children need more interaction. They need more parental interaction in their life. And you can't expect them to, in our time when I was growing up, I grew up in Kashmir, I was 10 years old, I left. If I had a stick, I could play with that stick all day long. That's the reality. I would climb a tree, and that's how I spent my time when I was 9 years old. My 9-year-old son needs constant interaction. He gets bored. So you have to find creative ways. You have to figure out how I can engage my children, whether it's through reading or playing with them, doing puzzles with them, or going outside with them, and then having some screen time. Screen time will be there. You can't expect to completely cut it off. Maybe engage with them through the screen time. If your son likes Minecraft, play Minecraft with them. It doesn't have to be 3, 4, 5 hours a day, but maybe like some of the time can be with that as well. But find that creative way that you can engage with them in your own household. But you cannot expect them to just turn off the screens and just sit there and not do anything. That children nowadays are not used to that. Unfortunately, adults are not used to that. We can't sit there, not do anything for longer than 5 minutes. How can we expect children to do it? Also, if we want our children to not be attached to screen times, then we have to do the same thing. If we tell our kids, put away your iPad, and we're sitting in front of them on our phones, that's hypocrisy, right? We have to model our behavior. If we're watching TV, that's hypocrisy. So if you're going to say, put away your iPads or no screen time, then make it a rule, no screen time in the house for everybody, right? After dinner, we're not going to have any screen time for everybody. Everybody will put away their screens until sleep time, so that the children are more able to accommodate to that. Someone who's having sleep patterns, hectic, it's hard to talk, convincing things, difficult in circles. Okay, this is a more specific case, so I don't know if I want to talk about that here. You can email me and maybe I can help you with that. What can be done in skin peeling? Well, skin peeling oftentimes is a result of anxiety. So it's big when person has more anxiety, they peel their skin. So going back to the root cause of anxiety, what caused anxiety? Is there trauma related? Sometimes anxiety also can be caused by physiological reasons, like a hyperactive thyroid can cause anxiety. I think vitamin B6 or B12, like one of the vitamin Bs, can cause anxiety. Deficiencies can cause anxiety as well. Just like vitamin D deficiency can cause depression. So identifying the root cause is very important. How to learn to deal with unexpected situation. I think, as Muslims, that's a very straight up answer, that like we, in our lives, we're going to have unexpected scenarios. We don't have any, the only certainty in life is death. Other than that, there is no certainty, right? So everything is uncertain, and we have to be okay with uncertainty. If we're not okay with uncertainty, then there's something wrong with our aqidah, right? So the reality of this world is that there is uncertainty here. Anything can happen at any time, but that doesn't mean we live in fear. That just means that we live in hope that inshallah we'll get through it, and inshallah Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be there to protect us and to help us. And that's why we connect with Allah all the time. And living through that fear all the time is not going to be helpful. What restricted Islamic psychology from becoming a savior compared to other? There is probably a lot of reasons why Islamic psychology didn't flourish. I think part of it was that none of that got translated over. Colonialism, postmodernism happened. There might be some bias against Islamic psychology as well. I don't exactly, I can't really pinpoint the exact cause of why Islamic psychology didn't flourish after the 16th or 17th century. But we know one of the first hospitals, psychiatric hospitals in the world was in Iraq in 9th century. So we know that Muslims were the first ones to treat psychiatric illnesses. But I don't have the exact answer for that question, unfortunately. Let's see. Thank you.
Okay. Dr.
Yes.
Fahad, we'll end this meeting, inshallah, now.
Okay.
Thank you for your time, mashallah. And you have delivered a very excellent talk. And it actually what was beneficial for me also. So we'll just stop receiving questions from here. Dr. Fahad has sent his email address. You can contact him through email. And thanks a lot, Dr. Saab, for your time.
Okay. It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure.
Yeah,
feel free to contact me. I'm gonna just actually paste my link tree that has, I think, all of my my contact or my social media profiles. So if anybody wants to reach out for any help, feel free to do that, inshallah. Take care, everyone. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.